Hello, welcome back to my kitchen. I am excited to bring you a full meal today. This is actually what we're gonna eat for dinner. So this is a one pan, sheet pan dish. So we're gonna put it on this guy. There's a lot of different ways that you can create sheet pan meals. I love them because they're so flexible, versatile. You can use practically whatever you've got in your fridge. You can switch up the protein if you like different things. You can even make it vegetarian by using a fried egg instead of a animal product or a meat product. So I am going to start this off. The first thing you want to do with a sheet pan thing, what I like to do is to start the oven while I'm prepping all of my vegetables. And I start with the vegetables that need the most cook time. So I've got potatoes, I have some zucchini, summer squash, a couple of peppers, and then an onion. So of these things, and then for our protein, we're gonna do pork. I have this giant 5-pound pork loin that I found at the grocery store on sale. I'm gonna show you what I'm gonna use for the sheet pan meal, and then also how I'm going to save the rest for later. So I'm gonna start with the potatoes for this recipe because they're what are gonna take the longest amount of time. And I'm gonna dice them fairly small. So I'm cutting them in half and then just dicing those. And then I'll spread them out on the sheet pan. So if you wanted to substitute, you could definitely use sweet potato. You could use a winter squash, like butternut squash would be something really great to use. What else could we use in place of a potato? If you are looking to do just a lower carb options, then you can always skip the potato altogether and just do vegetables and the protein. So I've got my potatoes. I'm gonna go ahead and put those on there. This is going to make probably 4 to 6 servings. I love having leftovers of this. They'll keep in an airtight container in the refrigerator for several days. Usually they don't last too long in our household, but I would say about 5 days is as much as you'd want to do. Just make sure that they are airtight. It's not going to taste quite as good on the second and third days, but it'll be pretty delicious because of the way that we're preparing this. So right now I have the oven set to 450 degrees, which is pretty high temperature. And the reason for that is I want these vegetables to really get nice and crispy before they get too mushy. So the higher the temperature, the more chance it'll get to be crispy on the outside without overcooking them on the inside, and that makes vegetables taste really good. Remember, high heat is what changes the starches to sugar and what makes it taste better. So again, potatoes are on my pan. So I've got this here, and then I'm gonna just drizzle these with a little bit of olive oil, and then I'm gonna do just a little bit of salt. And the seasoning that I'm doing here, I'm actually gonna use a pre-blended seasoning called 33rd and Galena from Penzeys Spice. And I chose this one because if you can see there, it is a chicken and pork rub. And so since my protein is pork, this is gonna go really nicely. And I'm gonna put it on the vegetables, and then I'll season these again before when I put the pork on, before that goes in the oven. So I'm just gonna toss these really quickly, and then I will put these in my very hot oven. Okay, so we're gonna do about 10 minutes on those potatoes. That'll start them cooking. And in the meantime, I'm gonna work on my zucchini, my onion, and my peppers. So I'm gonna start with the zucchini because they are cleaner. My onion is pretty dirty. I don't want it to get dirt all over everything. And I'm going to cube my zucchini and squash because it'll be in more similar shapes to what the potatoes were, and it'll just be a little bit more even when we're trying to eat these. You could also cut these in rounds if you want, but it would just be a little bit, it's just really a preference and a mouthfeel difference. So my summer squash has a little bit of a bruise here, but it's okay. I'm just gonna cut that off and discard that part and use the rest of it. So this is the summer squash, and I chose these vegetables because they are in season. I just picked up some extra of these veggies when I was at the farmer's market, more than what I knew I would need. These are super versatile. I knew that we could throw these on the grill if we decided to do something last minute there, but these are also super good when you're roasting. And it's a really good time of year for these vegetables. You see them so often at farmers markets, and they are not very expensive at the grocery store because they're in season. That is definitely a pro tip, to always buy what's on sale. That typically means it's in season, if not near where you live, then somewhere closer in the world. They're not having to grow it in greenhouses or ship from really, really far away. So eating seasonally both saves you money and is of course better for the environment because we don't have to ship it quite as far. And if you get them fresh, it will really improve the quality. So while I'm waiting for the potatoes to cook, I'm just gonna throw these vegetables in this bowl. A lot of times I'll just put these directly onto the pan so I don't have to use a different bowl to get that dirty, but I don't want y'all to wait on me, so I'm just gonna throw that in that bowl. Now I'm gonna do the pepper. The way we prepare a pepper is I cut it in half. I'll see if I can do this up here, around the stem. You can do this with a paring knife if you're not comfortable with a chef's knife. I just use a chef's knife all the time, so I'm very used to it. Once you pull that out, then you're just gonna pull that stem out, and discard that, and then any of these little membranes, the white membranes, you'll pull those out as well. So pull any of those out. The seeds you can pull out. And then I like to just tap that over the sink to get any of the extra seeds out. Once that's done, then we will cut these into little squares as well, similar size to the zucchini squares. So you can see that the squares of my pepper and the squares of my zucchini are roughly the same size, and that's because we want those to cook at the same rate. We don't want one to cook a lot faster than the other. While potatoes are more starchy and you need to cook them at higher temperatures or for longer, the rest of these veggies are gonna cook pretty similarly, so we don't want them to overcook. I'm gonna do the same thing with my second pepper. Again, I'm gonna cut around the base. I cut it in half first and then cut around that seed pocket. If anybody else has other pro tips for how they cut their veggies, I always love to learn how. A friend of mine just showed me a new way to cut a melon. So again, we're gonna pull out that seed pocket and discard that, and then any of those membranes we'll just pull out and discard. So this has a little bit of, looks like he's had a harder life, so I'm just gonna cut out a little bit of this. There's a little brown spot in here. Not a problem, you can still eat this, but I'm just gonna cut out this little part that's a little bit discolored and discard that, and we'll use the rest of the pepper. If you're having trouble pulling out the white membranes with your fingers, you can always use your paring knife or a chef's knife to cut those out too. And again, I'll tap that to get rid of those seeds. And our potatoes are doing well. We have about 5 minutes on those. So I'm cutting all of these veggies and throwing them all together in this silver bowl over here. Just getting them ready and out of the way. Okay, so there's our zucchini and our peppers. Now I'm going to prepare our onion. So in a similar way, I want to cut these in about the same size pieces. This is pretty dirty, so I'm putting it on the edge of my cutting board. And this came from the farmer's market. You know that when it's fresh, this came from the ground. That's how onions grow. So they're a little bit dirtier, and that's okay. We know it's fresh. And you would be surprised that even at things like onions, you can definitely tell a flavor difference when you're eating a fresh vegetable than when you're eating one that's been stored or been transported a really long time. So whenever you have a chance, eat what's in season. It tastes better. I feel like the best example of that are fresh tomatoes. If anyone's ever eaten a tomato in December, they are bland and terrible. But if you eat one fresh from the garden, it is so sweet and yummy. I'm just gonna rinse this because there is a lot of dirt on that little guy. And I'm gonna rinse my knife too. So a little bit of dirt usually won't hurt you. It just is a little bit crunchy, and I don't like that dirt crunch. I think it's weird. So, okay, I'm gonna cut these in fairly wide wedges. And then I'm gonna cut them in about thirds crosswise so that, again, these pieces are similar. Again, this is a preference, so that's about how big the piece of onion is compared to the zucchini. So I'm gonna throw the onions in with my vegetables as well. And then, let's see, yeah, and then I'm gonna show you how to prep this pork. So I actually will let the vegetables cook with the potatoes for a little bit longer. These I'm just gonna cut in half. Okay, but I want to show you what I'm gonna do with this guy. So buying meat in bulk is really handy, but if you don't take care of it, then it can go to waste. So my favorite thing to do when I do buy a larger piece of meat is to use part of it for a recipe that week that I'm doing and then freeze the rest of it. But I like to prep it in a way that I know I'm gonna use. So pork loin, I'm actually gonna cut this into cubes for this recipe that I'm gonna throw together with everything else. But we like to use pork loin as pork chops, and I'll cut them in about 1/2-inch slices, and we'll throw them on the grill or sear them in the skillet. The other thing you can do is to make a pork roast in the crock pot, which is super delicious. So I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna open this on the big side. Okay, so this is 5 pounds, which is gonna be about 3 meals. I'm gonna just drain some of this extra juice. We don't need all of that. And then I'm gonna put this whole thing on my cutting board. You'll notice the other thing I did was to, I'm really careful about the order in which I prep my vegetables and meat. So I'll always prep my meat last because you don't want to cross-contaminate your cutting board. There's a chance that you're not cooking the vegetables as long as you're cooking the meat. And so you run the risk of having some sort of foodborne illness from that. So the order is you always want to cut up and use your cutting board and knife for the fresh vegetables first and end with the meat products. Okay, so I just cut this pork loin into thirds. A third of it I'm gonna just put directly into this Tupperware that I have. This I'm gonna use for a pork loin roast later. But the next third I'm gonna go ahead and cut into slices. Like I said, I'm gonna do about 1/2-inch thick slices. And I'll freeze them in another Tupperware container, just like this. And then these will be good for several months, but it's a nice way to take advantage of some of the sales on meat without having to get sick of the same protein over and over. So I'm just gonna put that in my second Tupperware. So that is ready to go. And I will label these. I have found that I often think that I'll remember what things are and then don't. So I always recommend to put a piece of masking tape on the Tupperware lid with the name of what it is and also the date. So I'm also gonna clarify on each of these which one is for the pork chops and which one is the pork loin roast, because I don't want to thaw the wrong thing. With the rest of these, I slice them into those 1/2-inch slices, and now I'm just cutting them into cubes. And this is what I will throw on the pan. I think I might actually throw it on at the same time as these other vegetables. It depends how large of pieces. Meat usually takes, in these cubes, it'll probably take 10 or 15 minutes. If I were putting on like a larger piece, like if I were using chicken thighs or something, that could take a little bit longer, and so I'd want to cook the vegetables first, or I put them on at the same time, definitely. So yeah, the best way to cook your meat and to know when it's done is to use a food thermometer, not just for food safety, but because it also tells you the food quality. So for example, pork, when it is fully cooked, is at 145 degrees Fahrenheit. But it looks like it's still pink, which is a little bit disconcerting if you're worried about foodborne illness. So now that I've been handling the raw meat, I'm gonna wash my hands before I grab the rest of our vegetables. And then I will just show you how I'm gonna throw on the rest of these things. Now, if I throw on the zucchini and the peppers and onions at the same time as this pork, they are gonna be a little bit more crispy. So if you're not a fan of those crispy vegetables, then cook those just a little bit longer. Throw those on first. And let's see how our potatoes are doing. Ooh, they look great. Okay. All right, so our potatoes are sizzling. Can you hear them? Yum. So I'm just gonna stir them up just a little bit to make sure that they're not stuck too much. But that oil, oops, one escaped. That oil really works well. It's hard to do in the air, guys. Okay. So after I just stir all those just a little bit, Now I'm gonna throw on the rest of these vegetables. So we'll just pour those on. My sheet pan is almost not big enough because I have so many amazing, delicious vegetables. And now, let's see. I want to show you what I'm doing without burning myself. We'll do this next door. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna do a little bit more oil and then a little bit more salt and pepper. I'm gonna throw this, actually I'm gonna do the pork on top. Let's do there's salt and pepper. This is to taste. If you want to measure, my rule of thumb for my arm strength. Oh gosh, that's funny. Yes, I've been doing yoga, Lori, so that helps. Okay, so salt and then our seasoning. Okay, and now let's add the pork to the top here. Okay. Great. I'm just gonna throw this in the oven just like this. And I'm gonna give it 10 minutes, and then I'm going to temp one of these pieces of pork to see how it is. I get nervous about foodborne illness, so I wash my hands every single time I touch any sort of raw meat. Okay, let me show you what this pan looks like. It looks super yummy. Okay. Yeah, that is our delicious one-pan meal. So I'm gonna throw this in the oven and give it about 10 minutes, like I said. I will check the temperature. I will also stir it to make sure that all those veggies are cooking evenly, and then we will see how it's going. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I appreciate you being here, and post a comment if you have any questions or have other questions about how you can substitute things. Like I said, if you want to do a vegetarian version of this meal, instead of using the pork, I would crack eggs directly over the vegetables, and those will cook in the oven, which is a pretty cool trick. So enjoy. Let me know what your favorite one-pan meals are, and I will catch you next week. Thanks, guys.